Howdy, everybody. Good evening. There you go. Thanks so much for being here with Texas Public Radio. My name is Nathan Cohn. Appreciate your presence here, and we appreciate your support of TPR because it allows us to make events like Think Science and all the other community events we do, like Worth Repeating, Cinema Tuesdays, et cetera, et cetera. It makes it all possible. So thanks for your support of Texas Public Radio. The goal of all these Think Science panel discussions is to get you in and out in roughly an hour, having learned a little bit more about the topic at hand from experts, academics, and folks working in the field that bring real-world experience. Before we begin, let's have a nice thank you for San Antonio Water Systems SAWS for sponsoring tonight's panel. 10 years ago, my late colleague, Brent Bowler, here at Texas Public Radio, moderated a fascinating panel on military medicine. And so 10 years is a long time in the field, enough time for some fascinating developments to happen. So I thought revisiting this topic would yield some interesting discoveries for the audience. And Brent, when he introduced the program, he did so by noting that military medicine has come a long way since 1775 when the Army was established. And if you visit the U.S. Army Department Museum at Joint Base San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston, you can get a close-up look at the history of the practice and some of the previous instruments that were used on and off the battlefield to treat soldiers. Some of that material looks like ancient times, especially to what we're going to be seeing tonight. Now we're living in a time where technology is being developed to enhance human performance. New equipment is reducing the effects of traumatic brain injury. These and more advancements are first used by the military, but military tech does find its way into civilian use later on, and so some of the wonderful things that you'll learn about today may be available to you later on in hospitals, labs, and other medical facilities around the country. We have these three fascinating speakers here today to share their work, and following their presentations, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. That's what this microphone is here for right here. We have this audience microphone because the program is not only being live streamed tonight on Texas Public Radio's YouTube channel, but also it's being recorded for later use by the TPR newsroom. So if you do have a question, please use the microphone so that we can capture the audio. And that way it'll be archived later on the TPR website so that you can share this with a friend or a colleague who wasn't able to attend in person. So let's welcome our three speakers here. We have right to my right, Kreg Zimmern. I'll give him a more formal introduction in just a moment. And all right here next to him is Dr. Dan Nicolella. And we begin this evening with Dr. W. Lee Childers, who's the Senior Scientist for the Department of Defense VA Extremity Trauma and Amputation Center of Excellence, EACE, at the Brooke Army Medical Center, Center for the Intrepid, Military Performance Laboratory, Joint Base San Antonio, Texas. He's executing DoD research funding on projects ranging from exoskeleton development, maximizing residual limb health for people with amputation, rapid rehabilitation for a return to duty, to multi-site FDA phase 2 clinical trials. And his collaborations include working with Southwest Research Institute and the University of Washington, UT Austin, Johns Hopkins, as well as research labs at Walter Reed, Naval Medical Center, San Diego, Uniformed Services University, and Womack Army Medical Center. So let's welcome Lee Childers here to start things off tonight for our military medicine panel.
Well, thank y'all so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to share what we've been doing at the Center for the Intrepid and the Extremity Trauma and Amputation Center of Excellence, particularly how we've used technology that was originally developed at the Center for the Intrepid for people going through complex limb salvage and applying those same techniques now to solve a new problem, which is tibial bone stress injuries. I'm a DoD employee, but I'm here. These words are mine and not official policy. Okay, so I want to start out with kind of who are some of these entities. And so we heard the Brooke Army Medical Center. If you're living here in San Antonio, you've probably noticed it's right off there, I-35. It is the only level 1 trauma center in the DoD. It is the only DoD center that will see civilians and is the only burn center. And so we do get a lot of trauma, and we take great pride in helping those people that have had those injuries get back to the daily activities that they choose to. Across the parking lot from the main hospital is the Center for the Intrepid. This is a outpatient rehab facility. It was built using the small donations from over 600,000 Americans. Were donated to the Fisher Foundation. They built this for advanced rehabilitation of people with amputation and complex limb salvage. And they gifted all that to the Department of Defense. And we've been running it ever since. And it is it's a humbling experience every time you go through the doors. And it's an honor and a privilege to be there to serve those that have served us. Lastly, I'm in the Extremity Trauma and Amputation Center of Excellence. We are a Center of Excellence created by Congress and mandated to do research, which is awesome if you're a researcher. And we accomplish this by having different research labs embedded other military treatment facilities. So as mentioned, Walter Reed, Uniformed Services University, Fort Liberty, Naval Medical Center San Diego, and where I get to play, the Center for the Intrepid. And we span the entire spectrum of care for extremity trauma, prevention all the way to back to community integration. One thing that is constant among all CFI, EAST, BAMC, Defense Health Agency in general is that we're really centered on the patient, and it's always refreshing when you get to go and work all day, and this is what you get to do. The Center for the Intrepid is interdisciplinary care model, so there's any discipline related to rehabilitation is in the building, and they're all focused on helping our folks get back and doing the things they like to do. And one of those things was to develop the Intrepid Dynamic Exoskeletal Orthosis, or the IDEO. So this occurred kind of during the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. We were having folks coming back with mangled extremities. We had great body armor, but the extremities were exposed, and thus IEDs and other battlefield injuries affected those predominantly. Some of those limbs were mangled, but could be salvageable, and our surgeons were working very hard to salvage those limbs. Even though they're going through all these surgeries, they're still in a lot of pain. They can't really walk on it very well, and they're asking to get their leg amputated. Surgeons, that is a permanent solution to this challenge. And so the clinicians at the Center for the Intrepid picked up on that and invented the IDEO, that is a carbon fiber, it's a carbon fiber device made for each patient, custom for each patient. It has a carbon posterior leaf spring, so when you hit the ground, it absorbs energy, and then when you push off, it springs you back forward. And it's really been a game changer for our limb salvage patients. We are able to get people to return to very high function very quickly, 67% return to duty rate, most of those being combat arms. And just think about how high you have to function in order to do those jobs. And we just finished a long-term follow-up study on everyone that left the CFI with an IDEO. And we were asking the question, okay, we thought we saved legs. Did we save legs? And we did. 90% of our patients are still using this technology. 90% of our patients still have their leg. 65 are still using it. Many have graduated to other devices. And there are some commercial spinoffs of this for the civilian market. The IDEO works because it controls the bending moment of the tibia. Okay, so the tibia is your shin bone. And so what happens is we have muscles that move us. And so the biomechanics of that is your calf muscles, your soleus, your gastrocnemius, they merge into the Achilles tendon, attach to the heel, and that gives you the push-off. Like every time you take a step, you contract those muscles, and you move forward. Well, it turns out, just due to the biomechanics of this arrangement and how we've evolved, is that those muscles produce substantially higher force than what we experience when we hit the ground. And that's what we see here in this graph from Vanderbilt University. The blue line is the ground reaction force. That's the force you feel when you hit the ground. The red is the modeled muscle force. And you can see it is much larger, and then the tibia force is the summation of those forces. And so because the calf muscles are behind the tibia, when they contract, they create a really big bending moment. They try to bow that tibia every time. And when you try to bend things, bend structures, that's usually how you can really increase the stress in those structures, much faster than you could if you were just loading it axially. And the IDEO is basically a structure in parallel with a biological system, which just reduces the bending moment on the bone and reduces the loads that the person is subjected to when they go out and move. And so because the bones are under less load, the hardware, the surgeries, all the things, and so people can run without pain with an IDEO. We have had a long history, a lot of success with the IDEO. We still have people on active duty using the IDEO right now, somewhere around the world. We wanted to take what we've learned from there and try to help other people in service. And so bone stress injuries is the #1 cause people don't make it through basic or advanced training. So think of that. You know, you just signed up, you volunteered to serve, you go to basic, and you don't make it because you get a bone stress injury. I mean, that's not only your loss of what you plan to do with your life, but also, you know, loss to the military. That was talent that could have been helpful. 40% of those bone stress injuries are in the tibia, so it is like the king of all bone stress injuries in the military. And it costs, just in direct cost, $10.5 million. Air Force basic training is all right here at Lackland. And this does not include the indirect cost of value lost because that person could not be retained. And so we were, you know, pondering around, and we were thinking, you know what? We could take what we've learned with the IDEO, we could rearrange it, and make a whole new system that could help with tibial bone stress injuries. And so we did that. We've created a modular, you know, small, medium, large IDEO that could be fitted at any clinic anywhere around the world. You don't need a giant Center for the Intrepid to build it. Testing it is challenging. To really test it, we need to know the loads going through the tibia. There's some ethical challenge of doing that in living people. I would not volunteer for one of those experiments. And so we still need to figure this out. We need a way to test this system. And so we came up with a robotic leg that is actuated by an Achilles tendon, and it essentially walks in our materials testing machine, and we have strain gauges to measure strain, which is directly related to stress, on that tibia. And we can test very rapidly different ways of making it, different carbon fiber layups, just name it, we can test it. And we've done quite a bit. So much so that we now have a prototype in human testing. And these are the data for the first 2 subjects. So this is tibial axial load. It's an indirect calculation. Again, you can't implant things here. I would not recommend it. And you can see the blue line is someone walking with just their combat boot on. And then with the combat boot plus the exoskeleton, you can see those loads drop dramatically. Not quite as much as 74%, but again, this is not measuring the bending moment or the bending torque. This is the axial load. So this is a single line force, if you will. It's been so successful that we're working with the 59th Medical Wing, Lackland Air Force Base, Fort Sam Houston, to roll this out as a clinical trial and actually put it on trainees and see, you know, can we get people to return to duty faster? A big challenge we've had with this is understanding, well, how much strain should we reduce in a tibia? I mean, I'm super excited we got 74%. I didn't expect any of that. Is that enough? Is that too much? Do we only need to do 30%? I have no idea. And this isn't, again, it's something you can't really test in a human, like living human population. And so we've taken a modeling approach with that. And so we have Caroline Schilling, who's in the audience back there, UTSA PhD student, that is taking the data we're collecting in the lab and modeling bone stress injuries in the tibia as part of our ORISE fellowship program. And then Dan Nicolella, we have a project with Dan to apply their digital twin technology that he's going to talk to you about in a way that we can test and try to understand the probability of someone getting a tibial bone stress injury based on the different exoskeleton designs or different other factors that related to that person. So with that, I'm done. And I'll pass it on to Dan.
And here is Dan Nicolella, who's an Institute engineer and manager at Southwest Research Institute with over 30 years of experience developing advanced multidisciplinary approaches to investigate the complex behavior of the human body, collaborating with teams of researchers from around the country and the world. And as you're going to learn, his current work focuses on the development of personalized human digital twins for human-in-the-loop system design and performance optimization. So let's learn more about that.
Thanks, Nathan. You make me sound really old. 30 years. Wow, it doesn't seem that long. Well, welcome, and thanks for coming out. It's an honor for me to represent Southwest Research Institute on the work we're doing with the Center for the Intrepid and others to help our service members recover from injury, to perform to the highest level. And I'm going to talk about some of the technology that we've been developing that can also be translated to other applications outside of the military for clinical applications. And there's some interesting sort of high performance applications as well. So sports performance, athletes, et cetera. So let's dive right in. If we can get this to work. There we go. As Nathan mentioned, we've been doing this kind of work for over 30 years at Southwest Research Institute. I'm an engineer, and I'm fascinated about how the body works. And so we've been applying engineering principles to understand how the human body works, primarily in the musculoskeletal system. We've been doing this at different length scales, from the nanoscale, how your tissues are put together, the molecules that make up your bones and cartilage, et cetera, to the cells that control the biological function and also the growth and remodeling of tissues like bone, as Lee alluded to. We also have a lot of experience building computational models of the body. So these are digital representations of the human body, again, primarily focused on the musculoskeletal system. As you can see, as we move from left to right, we go from nanoscale cells, components, and tissues to the whole body. And one of the things that we're doing now, as Nathan mentioned, is we're combining all these technologies into something that we call a personalized digital twin. And here's my ChatGPT generated representation of a digital twin. A digital twin is exactly what you would expect it to be. It's a digital replication of a system. In this case, it's the human body. And we use computer simulations to understand what's happening to the body at different length scales, from whole body movement to what's happening at the tissue level. So I'll get to how we're doing that with bone stress injuries. So this is sort of a high-level overview of what we mean by digital twins. We're able to measure and monitor how someone is behaving, in this case, how someone is moving, with non-invasive sensors. This is a technology I'm going to talk about in some detail here in a minute. We use that to understand, as I mentioned, what's happening to the human body, what's happening internally. This information is then used to generate informed decisions, right? So this information can then be fed back to the individual to change behavior. We can use it to design equipment like exoskeletons, and give feedback to the individual as to how to improve their performance, how to minimize injury, or a combination of both of those things. So the first thing I want to talk about is this way that we're measuring how people move, right? So I don't know if you're all familiar with animation. You've probably all seen the suits that actors wear that have the balls that are put on the suits. We track those balls, and that basically allows us to measure how someone moves. That technology was actually developed for biomechanics to allow us to understand how the body moves. It's fantastic technology, but it takes a long time to put these balls and these dots on an individual and measure how they're moving. It generally has to be done in the laboratory, so you can't capture how someone's moving and behaving in a real world environment. So we set out to develop a technology that uses just video cameras and computer vision and artificial intelligence combined with biomechanical modeling. And so this allows us to capture human behavior with something like our cell phones, right? A cell phone camera, it's in my other pocket, or something like a GoPro. And I have some examples here of how this technology works. Can be used in any environment. We set up some iPads out on our softball field at Southwest Research Institute. We can capture, again, you can see a representation of the skeletal system. We can also capture the movement of implements, like in this case, a baseball bat, but this could be practically anything. This kind of technology allows us to do high throughput measurements. And so we had one of our team members was getting ready to have a knee replacement. So we brought her down to the laboratory, and in 5 minutes, we were able to capture how she's moving. She went in for the surgery. Well, we brought her back down into our lab and had her walk again in front of our cameras, and we can quantify the effect of that knee surgery on her gait. We can clearly see that her gait's improving because of that knee replacement. And so this technology allows us to basically democratize motion capture. We can do it on a playing field, in a training environment, in a clinic. We can set this up in a doctor's office. So you don't need specialized equipment. You don't need specialized laboratory or controlled environments, et cetera. So we use this technology to help the Air Force, the Special Warfare Training Wing here at Lackland Air Force Base, understand why they have such a high injury attrition rate as their trainees are going through training. We had them essentially perform a series of functional movements. These are things like squats or single leg, I can't do that, single leg squats. And we filmed them with our video cameras and measured how they're moving. We were able to show that by looking at the pattern of movement, so how all their joints are working together to produce this movement, we can identify those individuals that are very likely to go on to get an injury as they're going through training. Now, this is important because traditionally, when we look at biomechanics, we're looking at what I call univariate measures, right? So if we were to do a squat, the measure that we would use is how far you can go down. The maximum joint angle, your maximum knee angle during that squat. We look at this holistically. We look at, again, the pattern of how someone is moving. So all the coordinated joint motions, right? So how you control your body is important for understanding how you're going to move. And it turns out it's very important to understand if you're at high risk for injury going through training. This is another interesting application of our technology. Again, it's not military focused, but it shows how we can translate this to something outside of the military. We did a project with our collaborators at Emory University, where they were looking at how NFL players are at risk for hamstring injuries. This is a huge problem in the NFL. So they videotaped players sprinting, maximum sprint. They ran as fast as they could. We measured their running biomechanics. They also looked at the morphology or the anatomy of their leg muscles. And we combined these two things, how your muscles are shaped with how you're running, and we were able to predict, this is prospectively, so predict into the future, which one of these players was at a high risk of getting a hamstring injury. And we were able to do this with 92% accuracy, which is what I think is pretty amazing. And there's a lot of interest in applying this kind of idea to identifying, again, those individuals who are at high risk of injury, and then doing something about it, right? So that's the next step. I call this the so what question, right? You can identify those individuals, but what do you do about it? So this is what we're doing about it. As Nathan mentioned, and I talked about at the beginning, we're developing these personalized human digital twins. So this is a high fidelity computational model of the human body. So it includes all the major organs, all the major structures. This allows us, as Lee was mentioning, to put people in very dangerous situations and understand how the body would respond. And here are some examples of some of the things that we're doing. Aircraft ejections, underbody blasts from an IED, hard landings. I'm sorry, some of the videos aren't playing right, but hard landings on an aircraft. And at the bottom right over there, a behind armor blunt trauma analysis. And I'll use this to talk about how we're doing this. Sorry about the video not working. As I mentioned, this is a very high fidelity model of the human body. So when we're wearing body armor, we've designed body armor to be very effective. It's very effective at stopping penetration of the projectile. But when you're hit with a projectile wearing body armor, all that energy gets transmitted into your body, and you could, get seriously injured. And so with this kind of modeling approach, I don't know what happened here. We can basically look inside the body and understand what the risk of injury is to all the organs that are behind that body armor. So we can understand what's the risk of a rib fracture, what's the risk of your liver being lacerated. We integrate all these risks of injury into an injury score, what we call a incapacitation score. This allows us to put the human in the loop and do a design optimization of a system. In this case, the system is body armor. So we can look at a threat hitting anywhere on the body. We can understand what the probability of injury would be to any organ in that threat zone, compute the probability of incapacitation, and then iterate looking at, well, what happens if we change the material? What happens if we change the thickness? What happens if we change the fit and coverage or the overall weight of the body armor? And do that and iterate until we minimize that risk of injury while maximizing protection. So all this is coming together into this idea of a human digital twin. We're at the point now where we can take a video of someone, we can videotape someone doing some sort of activity, and then we can automatically generate a digital representation of that individual. I call this a multi-scale human digital twin. And this is where, coming back to the exoskeleton work that we're doing with the Center for the Intrepid, we can use this technology to optimally design these kinds of exoskeletons. So this is how it works. We can measure how someone's moving. In this case, we can use our markerless biomechanics system, or we can use a more traditional system like they're using out at the Center for the Intrepid. We can understand what the forces and loads are on the body, feed those into our human digital twin, and again, I'm sorry, the video is not working here, and then we can compute very precisely what the stress or strain is in the tibia as someone is running. All right, so we're running, we're filming or capturing how they run, and then we're computing what that stress is in the tibia. We know from experimentation, Lee mentioned it's unethical to do these kinds of experiments. Apparently in some countries it's not so unethical. And so they did these kinds of experiments back in the 80s and 90s, and actually we know what the strain is in the tibia, or in the tibia in this case. And so we know what the thresholds are. So we could, again, put the human in the loop and understand, okay, if you're running in this manner with this kind of biomechanics, you have a certain amount of weight if you're in the military for a rucksack, you're wearing certain shoes, maybe you're getting tired. How do all those things affect what's happening at your tibia where those stress injuries are occurring? And we can put the human in the loop. We can do an optimal design. In this case, we're looking at the exoskeleton design. What's the best configuration of this exoskeleton such that we minimize the risk of injury, or maximize, in this case, the probability of that injury healing and giving that individual the opportunity to continue to train or continue to run. So this is my last, I think this is really cool stuff. This next thing is another example of how we're using digital twins to optimize performance. We asked the question, we're working with some researchers at UTSA here in town. We asked the question, can we tweak a baseball pitcher's pitching mechanics such that they maintain their performance? In this case, performance is how fast they're throwing the ball, but minimize their risk of injury. We all know that pitchers suffer from UCL injuries, Tommy John injuries, or shoulder injuries. That's because they're throwing, as hard as they can. So we captured some biomechanics of pitchers. We, again, our model's not showing. We ran it through our digital twin, and we asked the question, if we tweaked this pitcher's pitching mechanics, what would happen to the torque in their shoulder and the torque in their elbow as a proxy for injury? And what we're able to show, maybe we can show it? Well, yeah, we can't really show it, but I'll tell you what we found is that we could reduce the torque in the shoulder and the elbow by 30%, which is a huge amount, and while maintaining ball velocity, pitch velocity. And it's just a small tweak in how this pitcher is pitching. It turns out if you block your front leg sooner and cause the rest of your body to whip over, you don't need to apply as much torque in your shoulder and your elbow. So using your body mechanics to produce that motion. And again, maintaining ball speed. So this is an example of how we can use human digital twins going forward. This is our concept of digital twins. I talked about biomechanics, but we can also capture physiological measures, measures from blood draws or urine analysis, or how much you're sleeping, what kind of food that you're eating. We can feed that into this concept of a human digital twin. This twin is physics-driven, physiology-driven, and if we don't understand the underlying mechanics or mechanisms, we can use artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches to understand how this stuff affects performance, injury, etc. And then we can feed those things back. We can understand what the sensitivities are of certain things affecting your performance, and that's where we get to the so what question. How can we affect change? What are the things that are affecting our performance the most, and what can we do about them? What are the modifiable risk factors? Excuse me. So finally, there's some really exciting things going on here in San Antonio. We're part of the San Antonio Human Optimization Partnership. This is led by our colleagues at the Health Science Center here in collaboration with folks from UTSA and Southwest Research Institute. And I'll stop there, and hopefully we'll have some questions at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dan. And Dan's colleague here is Kreg Zimmern, who's a senior research engineer at Southwest Research Institute, specializing in medical device research and development. Kreg has over 8 years of experience in creating medical devices and equipment for regenerative medicine, bioprocessing, bioproduction, and biomanufacturing. Kreg plays a crucial role in advancing the bioengineering group's capabilities in additive manufacturing and 3D printing, and leads initiatives focused on traumatic brain injury. Thank you so much, Kreg, for being here.
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be up here with these two guys. 30 years, lots of time, and I've got 8, so hopefully I can help stack up to what we're doing here. But it's great to be able to talk with these gentlemen. I don't know if my slides are there. This is what happens when you load them up with videos. But anyway, one thing I can talk about a little bit is Dan and I work both at Southwest Research Institute. And I'll talk a little bit about the Institute. We have over 11 technical divisions at the Institute. We do things that are, the tagline is deep sea to deep space, and it really is that. We have space sciences. We worked on the Alvin submersible. We have Dan's mechanical work in the mechanics division. I work in pharmaceutical development and bioengineering. So we have, expertise from the entire spectrum of engineering and science to draw from. It's a really, really great place to work and collaborate. So the main topic for tonight was, military-driven innovation. Why is that important? What are the advantages of that? So part of this is public funding. Military is publicly funded. And so you start to look at how do we get things done? How do we get big risk, big reward projects done? How can we take big swings and do things that aren't necessarily economically viable? It addresses problems in things that are small civilian markets. You think about orphan diseases, you think about things that maybe only affect 100 people at a time, or only affect people in third world countries. Those people need medicine too. And that doesn't mean that, the companies can't address that. It means there's not a good incentive for them to address that. That's where this kind of partnership, this public-private partnership comes in. One of the advantages of this is for a company is you have a built-in customer. If you can make your device and meet the requirements they want, you have somebody now who's going to buy it, and they're probably going to buy a lot of it. So there's a good economic incentive for a company to work in a public-private partnership. Get all 3 P's out of there. It makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint then. And then we have something that I like to refer to as design efficiency. When you're in a commercial industry, you design a minimal viable product. What's the easiest, cheapest, simplest thing I can get out to sell it? Not to work, not to benefit the person the most, but I can sell it. It's a little bit the opposite here. We're looking for what is the thing that's going to work in the worst case scenario. The requirements that you're going to get from somebody like Dr. Childers of the military is stuff that needs to work in the field. It needs to work in the dark, in a ditch, under fire. That means that the things that you're designing are also going to work in the civilian world as well. What this means is this is a win-win for both the military and for private industry. We're driving innovation that's mutually beneficial and saves lives. So where would we be without the partnership of the military and public and private industry? Well, we wouldn't have GPS. We wouldn't have duct tape. We wouldn't have microwaves. That was developed from radar. We wouldn't have digital cameras. We built those originally to spy on people during the Cold War. And we wouldn't have the internet, the thing that allows us to live the lives that we are accustomed to today. For an example, the GPS is a satellite-based global positioning system, right? It would not have been viable for a company to fund satellites going into space based on an unproven market. The military needed that technology, so we built it. And now we have tons of GPS companies. We have companies whose entire technology is driven off GPS. That's the kind of thing that we get out of a public-private partnership like these. So let's talk about what I do. So I am a biomedical engineer. And we are working with the Department of Defense and the military on a couple projects that I want to highlight. And then we'll do a case study at the end where we could talk about traumatic brain injury. The first thing I want to talk about is we're working on a synthetic blood or a whole blood analog substitute. Right now, if you have a blood transfusion, so a whole blood transfusion, you have 42 days before it goes bad. And then you throw it away. There's nothing else you can do with it. You can't give it to a human. It gets tossed in the trash. Lots and lots of blood gets tossed in the trash. What we've done with the partnerships from the military and from universities is we've helped develop a system where we can upcycle that blood, we can get the hemoglobin out of it, and we can make a whole blood substitute that can increase the shelf life to between 6 and 12 months as a target. That de-risks your logistics a lot. So right now, blood has to be kept cold. It has to be kept cold up almost to the point of injection, and then it needs to be warmed so you can give it to somebody. This de-risks that because you no longer need to keep it cold. It's shelf stable at room temperature, and it's universal donor. We don't have any more of our rhesus factor. This is all hemoglobin-based nanoparticles, so you no longer have to worry about rejection. Some of the other things that we do, we talk about chemical countermeasures and medical countermeasures and antidotes. One big one right now is the cyanide antidotes. You look at all the fires going on in California, cyanide poisoning is a huge deal. We've helped create auto-injectors and different types of delivery systems to deliver those antidotes. We also work on medical devices and wound healing. So we help people go from an academic, just this is an idea and I've kind of proven the basic science works, through an application. We can help them go from, the university to the boardroom and get that product made. We've worked in cell and gene therapy, regenerative medicine, and biomanufacturing. So the case study I want to talk about today is TBI screening and assessment. So what is traumatic brain injury, or TBI? Traumatic brain injury is what you think it is. It's something that insults the brain it's usually caused by an external force. The common causes are what you think they are. They're falls. They're motor vehicle accidents. In the case of the military, it's blasts, right? And then we talk about sports and recreational activities. So how big of a problem is this? What's the scale? About 200,000 hospitalizations a year, about 70,000 related deaths in adults. In the military, since 2000, there have been over 450,000 traumatic brain injuries. The annual number is a little bit variable. 80% of those are classified as mild. But if you look, there's about 10% that are unclassified. One of the big problems with TBI is it's very difficult to classify. It's very difficult to quantify. And we're going to talk about these numbers are low because TBI is classically underreported and underdiagnosed. Part of the reason for this is the symptoms are subtle. It can be a headache. It can be you lost consciousness, but maybe nobody noticed. You didn't notice because you woke up pretty quickly. Nobody was there to say, hey, you were not responsive, you were out. How do you know you lost consciousness at that point? And a lot of the symptoms are subjective. You need a baseline from somebody to know if they're acting weird now or if they've just always been a little bit strange. You have to have a baseline and you have to have somebody to make that judgment. There's also, when we talk about our military and athletes, there's a stigma a lot of times associated with traumatic brain injury. There's a fear of losing your job. There's a fear of it affecting your career. There's a fear sometimes of going to the doctor because you have a headache. Those are significant problems in these industries. And then in the civilian world, you talk about limited screening and evaluation. It can cost $500 to go to the ER. Do you want to take your kid to the ER because he fell off a ladder and now his head hurts? Is that worth a $500 trip for the doctor to tell you to take an aspirin and go home? That's a good question. We also have there's a triage in emergency rooms. If somebody comes in bleeding and they have a headache or they were unconscious, you're treating the bleeding first. That's the most important thing, and that's the right thing to treat. Do you remember then to go back and say, hey, they also were unconscious. Do we need to look at a head injury? A lot of times, no. There's a lot of times there's not the follow-up. So why can't we just walk it off? We've all hit our heads. We've all fallen off things. I'm just gonna, take my Advil and wake up the next day. A lot of us played football, and we would run around intentionally and slam our heads into everybody else, all of our good friends. Why not just walk it off? What's the big deal? Well, the impact of untreated TBI can be major. So you're increasing the severity of the symptoms long term. You can sometimes make those symptoms chronic. You look at long-term risks, so PTSD, various mental health disorders, and fairly significant emotional behavioral changes. The big issue is compound TBI. So compound TBI, you look at CTE that we've seen with our football players recently. You have an increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. So the kind of takeaway from TBI is if TBI is treated in a timely and effective manner, it's often a minor inconvenience. Even if you have a TBI, the treatment may be go home, take some medicine, but also don't do something that might get you another one. Don't get back on your roof. Don't go play football this week. Don't go back into the field. Compound TBI can be catastrophic. It can take you from having to take your aspirin at home to learning how to walk again, to learning how to talk again, learning how to eat again. So treatment and the effective treatment and the timely treatment of TBI is something that's missing in our system, and it would be a major step forward to be able to address that. So how do we identify it? So we talked about the issues with identifying TBI. So what are the answers to that? Well, one of the answers that we've come up with is screening, and we didn't actually come up with this. The Air Force came up with this. So screening is usually listed as like a low cost, low effort type thing that they can provide you the opportunity for follow-up. So something that you can do for low overhead that has almost no investment for the person, but can let you know if there needs to be follow-up or help you make return to duty or not decisions. One of those screening tools focuses on anosmia. So anosmia is the inability to differentiate smells. The loss of sense of smell is often linked to TBI, and it's something that can be missed or overlooked. I bet you guys don't notice that you can't smell anything in here right now. Now, if it smelled bad, you'd notice that, but you don't notice the lack of sense of smell. So a lot of times this is something that's overlooked, and it can be subjective. The MACE assessment is something that's used in the field right now, and they ask you, can you smell things? Well, like what things? What are we smelling? And so what we've come up with is the ammo test, and that gives you an objective measure for smell loss. So in both of the previous presentations, we looked at high-tech solutions. We looked at some really cool engineering. We looked at some really cool math. As an engineer, I love that. This is not that. This is a smell test. Anosmia, as we talked about, is an indicator for traumatic brain injury, and especially if you couple it with an event that is likely to produce a traumatic brain injury, like a blast, like a fall. So the underlying science from this came out of the Air Force Research Lab in the Uniformed Services University. And they came to us and said, we have identified a link between anosmia, and we've quantified it between anosmia and TBI. We want you to make a test. We want a test for this. So at Southwest Research Institute, what we did is we went to work, and we thought of all kinds of really cool ideas. We thought of all kinds of like multi-clicker pens and auto injectors that shot things out into the air that you could smell. And then we decided to take a step back, and we said, what if we just make smelling salts? And that's what we've done. They're very specific. We have specific odors that are linked through the research to the function that we're trying to get. And then we made these through good manufacturing practices so they can be used as a medical device. But one of the things that is important about this is we use the military to drive our requirements. The requirements for this is it needs to be able to be used in a ditch in the dark under fire. We want people at the front line, we want commanders at the front line to have this information to use in return to service decision making. So the product we came up with is about the size of a deck of cards. You got 6 odorants, you crack them one at a time. They have an answer card, you have the person pick which one it is. You mark it on your little answer card there and then check it. It's a yes or no, did they get it right? If they didn't get it right a lot of the time, that's an indication that they need to go get a CT or an MRI. The cool thing about this is if you do this test, anosmia is actually a higher sensitivity signal for traumatic brain injury than CT. CT, the gold standard for treatment right now for TBI is you get a CT, and if they see something, they send you for an MRI. CT is a very imperfect tool for this. This tool actually performs better and has a higher sensitivity than CT does. So this is something that is low-tech, high fidelity, and can be used almost anywhere that can reliably identify anosmia. This doesn't test for TBI. This isn't a TBI diagnosis. What this is, it says there's a problem. This says you fell, you were in a blast, you were in a motor vehicle accident, and now you can't smell things. That's highly predictive of being TBI positive. You should go get checked. So who can use it? So like we said, EMTs in the field, we could be, put these in all of your EMT bags. On the soccer fields, on the football fields, on the sidelines of both adolescent and professional sports. And far forward, in that ditch, in the dark, under fire. This is something that can be used anywhere to help people get the treatment they need. So these minor inconveniences, these things that are able to be recovered from easily, do not become catastrophic, lifelong problems. So major takeaways from kind of what we've talked about today. The military and Department of Defense direction is imperative to what we're doing. We need the direction, we need the requirements from people like Dr. Childers to help make good devices that are going to be impactful and innovative. Institutions like Southwest Research Institute are an effective bridge between those sectors, so moving from that military sector to that commercial sector. and the public-private partnerships allow for high-risk, high-reward type innovation, especially when there's a public need that exists, when the commercial viability is either unproven or doesn't exist. I think that's all I have. So thank you very much.
So it's about 10 minutes till 8, so we're going to take about the next 10, 15 maybe minutes or so to have some questions. And then if you have a question as well, you're welcome to come up to this microphone right over here again so that we can record it and capture it for our listening audience later on. Kreg, let me follow up with you real quick just to kind of get things started here. And is this that system, is it, can coaches already get a hold of something like that now, or is it?
So not currently. We are working on getting a clinical trial going. So this is a Class 2 exempt device. The FDA has recognized that devices for loss of smell don't pose a safety risk. So we could market it. The company, the client could market it. Swear he does not market anything. Could market it now. They want a clinical trial. The underlying science is very solid and robust. We don't have any testing with the kits themselves. We want that testing. So right now what we're doing is producing units for clinical trials. And looking at SWIRI, we have a lot of different technologies actually addressing traumatic brain injuries. So we're looking to combine it with things like what Dan's doing and things like machine learning and a lot of our other groups to have high fidelity tools that this could be integrated into. So there's a lot of push around it, but it is not available yet.
Something that Dan mentioned too that makes me think about this as well as you were talking about the way body armor is can be fashioned based on your research to prevent internal injury, I guess, as well. And so is that something that SWIRI is working on as well in terms of both head injury and things as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. That example that I showed is an actual project that we're working on with the Department of Defense, with the Office of Naval Research. It's a demonstration of how our digital twin can be used to design safety systems, or systems that interact with the body. And as I mentioned, we can look inside the body and see what's happening as a result of some of these things that are interacting with us, and get a very fine understanding of the risk of injury or increases in performance, for instance.
Well, and we also have a really good materials modeling group that is, one of them is working on things like helmets and things like that. So we can combine Dan's digital twin technology and the information you're getting there with materials research and information to do the kinds of things you're talking about. How do those things interact, and how do we design around those? So one of the nice things about Southwest Research is we have all of those disciplines under one roof, so to speak.
Lee, you mentioned in your presentation a 67% return to duty, which could you clarify again? What does that mean? Does that mean basically going back and doing close to their normal line of duty exercises and things?
For 92% of them, yes.
Wow.
There are still some that may end up getting another job in the military or maybe not be deployed anymore. But I mean, the IDEO, it worked. Like you're not going to see return to duty rates that high for particularly for the high energy, very catastrophic injuries that we saw.
So this is going to sound like a really silly question, but like, how close are we to the $6 million man?
So we are actually working with UT Austin and Georgia Tech on at least the leg part of the $6 million man, and thus it's cost a lot more than $6 million.
Inflation since the 1970s is killing us. Who has questions in the audience? If you'd like, please come up here to this microphone if you would, please. Thank you.
Hi. Should I say my name or?
If you like, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nicholas. I had a question about science communication, like what challenges you come across in science communication, how you overcome them, and what is your general approach?
Science communication to the general public,
Yeah.
How do you tell your stories?
Yeah.
Events like this. No,
Yeah.
but what else?
Next week I'm doing Astronomy on Tap. So that's a monthly event here in San Antonio. Talk about another exoskeleton project. Any public talk I get to do, I take it. So we do a lot of stuff. A lot of our work ends up in scientific journals, publications, and it's read by other scientists to then stand on the shoulders of giants and push the system. But ultimately, like, it's for y'all. All this stuff is working for y'all. So anytime I get a chance to talk, I take it.
Yeah, I would just echo that. Events like this, all of us get invited to give talks at conferences or to gatherings or other organizations, and we jump at that chance. It's certainly a challenge, and it takes, I think, a lot of work and practice to translate some of the stuff that we're doing that can be really, high tech and detailed to something that's relatable to everyone. The other thing that we do at Southwest Research Institute is we publish it's basically like a Scientific American type magazine once a quarter that highlights a lot of the work that we're doing. So if you're interested in understanding some of the work that Kreg mentioned that's going on at Southwest Research Institute, you can sign up at our website and get access to these kinds of publications. We also try to do, and we're doing a lot better than we used to, have a social media presence and talk about some of the things that we can talk about in social media. So that raises the awareness of a lot of the work that we're doing as well.
Well, I was going to mention that, and I think I think science in general has been slow to adapt to that. Social media is a little bit of a double-edged sword for science. But we are, I think, making progress. I say we, not me. I'm not good at it. But we are doing better. I think one of the things that is really important is to teach scientists and engineers how to talk to normal people, not normal people, to other people.
We're not normal.
Yeah, we're the not normal ones. But it is really important to teach us how to talk in a way that can be received. And I don't think that's always been a focus. I think, especially so I graduated from UTSA, I think they did a really good job with that. And I feel like that they're doing a good job with it continuously. But that's really important and something that's evolved and is continuing to evolve.
Other questions? Anybody? Yes, please, come on up.
So, Kathy Lawson, how likely is it that robots will eventually just take over in battle so that we are working from a distance? Instead of robots, so you won't have to worry about the blast injuries. That's a tough one.
It's a tough one for me. I'm not that far into military planning to help.
That may be a question for the generals, not the scientists.
And they may not tell you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I have basically 3 questions. Number 1, the digital twin, whatever.
If you can come up on the microphone.
Sorry about that. December, we ran the San Antonio Marathon here. Do you ever see that just someone like myself as a marathoner could come and have y'all analyze my stride at the beginning of a marathon towards once you start getting tired, like you were saying, and give that feedback to just the general public or to the individual? Secondly, in a commercial, I work for UPS, lifting, lowering constantly. So when you were talking about the tibia and squats and all of that, really triggered me to think, how could that better prepare our workforce to work safe? And then lastly, for Kreg, the smelling salts, being a youth sports official, concussion is always huge. How far out do you think it is to where coaches or officials, when we see an impact that suspects concussion? Sorry for all 3 at one time.
That's okay.
No, those are great questions, and I'll address the first 2. That is certainly our goal, is to make this kind of technology and these kinds of analyses more ubiquitous. So they're available to everyone, from youth athletes to a marathoner. the markerless biomechanics technology that we developed will allow us to do that. So we could come out and set up at the start our camera system and get an assessment of how everyone's running as they start, or at some point, down the course, and then at half amount 26 or 13.2 different distances, and see how your mechanics are changing. And what I would like to see eventually is for us to be able to give feedback to say, hey, if you keep running like this is the kinds of things you can expect. We're currently working on a program with UTSA where we're doing almost exactly that. We're going to look at how someone runs with a backpack. So this is related to military training. As I mentioned, we're going to be able, our goal is to understand what's happening internally, so where injuries are occurring at the tissue level, so at the tibia, in your knee cartilage, your ligaments, as you're running with under these different scenarios, understand what's happening at the point of injury, and then look at what happens when you get tired. That's our focus, is what happens when you start suffering muscle fatigue and how your mechanics change. As Lee showed on one of his graphs, the muscle forces acting on your skeleton are a lot higher than what people expect. And as those change, as you get tired, that changes what's happening internally in those tissues that are failing. And tissue failure is injury. Your second question about basically ergonomics, right? How do you lift properly is another good example. We could measure you with just video cameras, performing those kinds of movements, and we can quantify, okay, what's the risk of injury if you're doing it this way. We can look at variations in that movement, or like I talked about, we can do an optimization. We can say, if you move this way specifically, you can still perform that motion and minimize your risk of injury. So there's lots of applications, I think, for this idea of digital twins.
On the time scale question, medical device development is frustratingly slow. There's lots to do. There's lots that has to be, a lot of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed. I am hopeful in the next couple of years we'll see this being able to get out. We do want clinical data. We don't have to have it. There are discussions right now with the client about, like, do we want to just get it out to the general public? If we do, how do we collect the data from that? We want to be able to figure that out. So they are having discussions around that. If I was being optimistic, I'd say 2 years. This is not a promise for sure. If I was being pessimistic, I think I'd say 5. Depends on, because one of the hard things about traumatic brain injury is clinical trials are very difficult. Recruitment's very difficult. And it takes a long time to get the numbers that you need to be statistically significant. And so that's kind of an uphill battle. We are working on ways to maybe make that a little bit better and to maybe be able to kill more than one bird with one stone. So there's progress, but it's kind of evolving.
I think there's such a stigmatism in youth sports with the word concussion.
Yeah.
An athlete or a parent does not want to hear the word concussion at all, because then they come out of the game.
Yeah. Maybe one or two more. Anybody else? Yes. And then you, sir, and then we'll close out.
Thank you. Hi, Dan. My name's Brett, and I really appreciate your work, but I'm afraid I'm going to ask a very unfair question. I'm all for the democratization of technology and science and things like that. But I think one of the downsides of lowering the barrier to entry is that we open the door for a lot of unqualified people to start abusing that technology and maybe taking advantage of people who don't understand it. So do you have any thoughts or ideas of how we could protect people from quack biomechanicists who would take your technology and basically try to abuse people with it? Or just financially take advantage? That's a more fair way to put it.
Yeah, that's
Put it out too early, untested, et cetera, et cetera.
that's a great question, and a lot of what we do, we spend a lot of time and energy especially because we do things computationally, right? You can make your computer models basically do anything that you want and get any answer that you want by turning all the knobs on your analysis. We spend a lot of time and effort in what we call verification validation, so that we know, we have confidence in the predictions that we're making with these kinds of models are reliable and trustable. We also are spending a lot of time in automating our system, right? So that might be a way to sort of limit abuse, but I think, there's always going to be an opportunity for, call them charlatans, to take advantage of people, and I think that's just part of our unfortunate human nature. But us as engineers and scientists, we're trying to do everything that we can to make sure that the technology is easy to apply. So that may sort of propagate some of the things that you're talking about, but also reliable and trustable.
Gentleman with glasses, let's close out with your question.
My name is Bobby Bellarmino. I've been listening to you guys, and you presented very fascinating informations. And we got to talk about the beginning of the dissemination. My question is dissemination of informations. And you kind of mentioned that you have magazines. Is that right? And I wonder, what about submitting to a peer-reviewed publication so that the public can learn about this wonderful things that you're discovering? And then also for you also, man, a comment about you want to get your end subjects to get more statistically significant. And I wonder, what about partnering with community? Because if I do research, I partner and then try to find the best way to get those subjects so that I can have much more meaningful data.
I can address the peer-reviewed publications. I mean, if it's allowable for our project, if it's not confidential or proprietary, we do publish in the peer-reviewed literature. That's another way that we disseminate. Not decimate. We could decimate. Disseminate information to the general public, but the general public generally doesn't read the scientific literature, right? So that's why we have these other means for communication. But yeah.
Yeah, and the congressional language that started the Extremity Trauma and Amputation Center of Excellence also mandated dissemination, and so we do tend to publish in peer-reviewed scientific journals. We try to cover the page charges so it's free to the public whenever that budget allows, and we try to do events like this to where people that may not be reading those journals can kind of understand what we're doing.
To answer the question about the recruitment, we are looking at working with community groups and other entities like that. So veterans groups are kind of a big priority for us. The tricky part with traumatic brain injury is, again, it's very subjective. It's very underdiagnosed. A lot of people don't know they have it, and we want to make sure that we're being ethical with what we do and getting good data. So it's tricky to be able to say, hey, we have this community of people that has, so for instance, veterans that has a high incidence of traumatic brain injury. Let's go look at them retroactively. That can work sometimes, but does that actually tell you the things you need to know? That is all good data, though. So one of the things that we are working on at the Institute is being able to combine a multitude of tools and test them, and then use multivariate analysis to relate them. So things that wouldn't necessarily be related, using things like machine learning to say, actually, when you look at large data sets, these are some predictions and things you can make. That really then opens up your patient pool, because now you can go to somebody like a retroactive type thing and say, hey, let's take something like an EEG now, and then we're seeing these things and we know how that's related in people who are TBI positive. So now we can do other testing and other data. But we do want to be really careful around those types of populations, populations that are socioeconomically disadvantaged that may be incentivized to come participate with us because we're going to pay for their health care. that also is a kind of an ethical quagmire that we have to be really careful about and maintain the integrity of the science and the integrity of the people performing it and participating.
My last lightning round question is for all three of you, and that is if you know somebody or you find somebody that is perhaps in high school and finds themselves interested in the type of things that you do, what is your best piece of advice for them in terms of future development of those interests and studies?
So if you're talking about engineering in general, my first piece of advice is learn to love calculus. If you can get that, you're pretty good. And the rest of it, because I hated math. I'm an engineer who hates math. And when I got to calculus, things clicked and made sense. You can relate things to the real world. Get yourself through that, and then things become very interesting. And it's easy to stay in it.
Dan?
I would say engage in opportunities for visits to places like Southwest Research Institute, Center for the Intrepid. Look for internships or projects where you can be mentored by practicing engineers and scientists. We do a lot of that kind of work at the Institute. We have high school students come through periodically, and we show them the kinds of interesting and I think cool work that we're doing. I've had high school students work in our lab for summer internships, and so I would say just engage in those kinds of activities and get that experience.
And Lee?
Build stuff, break it, and do it again.
Awesome advice. Thanks so much to our three panelists, Dan Nicolella, Kreg Zimmern, and Lee Childers. Thank you for being here. Let's give them a round of applause. A reminder that this presentation and the slides will be available on our website, tpr.org, next week, so you can share them with a friend or colleague. Thanks to SAWS San Antonio Water System for their support of Think Science. Thank you to you for your support of Texas Public Radio, thereby making community events like this possible. We are so grateful for your support. I'm Nathan Cohn. We'll see you again real soon. Thank you.